Seated upon the throne was Princess Zalnintha, heir to the Zenthari Empire. Her presence was as commanding as the palace itself. Her violet skin seemed to absorb and reflect the ethereal glow around her, and her three eyes, each a different shade of amethyst, gleamed with an intelligence and sharpness that unsettled even the boldest of her subjects. She was the embodiment of regal perfection, her every movement deliberate and precise. To gaze upon her was to understand why she was called the all-seeing heir, a title she had earned not just through her lineage, but through her unmatched wit and unshakable resolve. For decades, the galaxy's most powerful and influential beings had journeyed to Zalareth, each hoping to win the princess's favor. The suitors came from every corner of the known universe, warriors who had led fleets to victory in battles that reshaped the stars, scholars whose discoveries had redefined the laws of physics, and artists who crafted beauty so profound it brought entire audiences to tears. Each one approached her with the utmost confidence, certain that their achievements would impress the princess. Yet, one by one, they left the throne room, defeated and humiliated. Zalina's rejections were swift and merciless. A single flick of her slender, clawed hand dismissed even the most extraordinary individuals, her words cutting deeper than any blade. "Unimpressive," she would declare, her voice cold and unyielding. Her disdain was absolute, and her decisions were final. The Zenthari people watched this parade of failures with a mix of fascination and concern. Rumors began to spread throughout the empire. Some whispered that their princess was impossible to please, her standards so impossibly high that no being in the galaxy could ever meet them. Others speculated that she had no intention of choosing a consort, that she sought to rule alone, defying the traditions of the empire. The High Council grew increasingly uneasy. An alliance through marriage was more than tradition. It was a cornerstone of the Zenthari's political strategy, a way to cement ties with powerful allies and ensure the stability of their vast empire. The council implored Zaltar to reconsider, to temper her expectations and choose a consort who could strengthen their position in the galaxy. But Zeliantha remained resolute. "I will not bind myself to mediocrity," she declared. "The Empire deserves a ruler who accepts only the best, and I will settle for nothing less." Her defiance left the council with no choice but to endure her rejections, even as the list of potential suitors dwindled. It was against this backdrop of disappointment and tension that a human arrived at the palace gates, a creature so unremarkable by Zenthari standards that his presence seemed almost laughable. No one could have predicted the ripple effect his arrival would have on the destiny of the Zenthari Empire and its unyielding princess. Adrian Cole had always considered himself ordinary, a fact that suited him just fine. Average height, average build, and a face so unassuming that it was easy to forget, Adrian had spent most of his career flying under the radar. As a lieutenant commander in the Terran Alliance, his record was respectable, but not exceptional. He was reliable, a dependable cog in the machine, but never the one to stand out. That was why he found himself feeling utterly out of place as he stepped into the throne room of the Zenthari Empire. He wasn't supposed to be here. The original ambassador, a polished diplomat with years of experience, had fallen ill with a rare virus just days before their scheduled audience. With no time to arrange a replacement, the task had fallen to Adrian by default. His orders were simple: represent humanity, avoid offending anyone, and do whatever it took to maintain peace. The grandeur of the throne room struck Adrian the moment he entered. It was a space that seemed designed to humble anyone who dared to stand within it. The walls pulsed with an otherworldly glow, and the floor beneath his boots shimmered as though he were walking on stardust. Dozens of Zenthari nobles, their elegant forms draped in iridescent fabrics, lined the hall, their gazes fixed on him with a mix of curiosity and disdain. but none of them held his attention like the figure on the throne. Princess Zaliatha was unlike anything Adrian had ever seen. Her violet skin shimmered in the room's light, her 3 eyes gleaming with a mix of intelligence and something else, something colder. She sat perfectly still, her back straight and her expression unreadable, as though she were a statue carved from the very essence of authority. When she finally spoke, her voice was as sharp and precise as a blade. "You are not the one your species promised." Adrian swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her gaze like a physical force. "No, Your Grace," he replied, keeping his tone steady. "The appointed ambassador was unable to attend. I've been sent in their place." A murmur rippled through the court, a sound of disapproval and amusement. Adrian could feel their judgment pressing down on him. "You are a substitute," Zalintha said, her tone laced with disdain. Adrian resisted the urge to shrink under her scrutiny. Instead, he straightened his posture and met her gaze. "I may not be who you were expecting, but I am here to represent humanity. That responsibility is one I take seriously." The court's laughter grew louder, a chorus of voices mocking his audacity. Adrian felt the heat rising in his cheeks, but he refused to look away from the princess. Zaliath raised a hand, and the laughter ceased instantly. She leaned forward, her 3 eyes narrowing as she studied him more closely. "Interesting," she said, her voice softer but no less commanding. "You carry yourself with a confidence that does not match your appearance. Very well, human. Let us see if your actions speak louder than your unimpressive form." The words stung, but Adrian managed a small, wry smile. "Actions often do, Your Grace." Her lips curved ever so slightly, a hint of amusement flickering across her otherwise stoic face. "We shall see." As the princess dismissed the court for the evening, Adrian felt the weight of what lay ahead. He had walked into a lion's den, and the eyes of an entire empire were upon him. Still, a spark of determination flared within him. Ordinary or not, he was here now, and he wasn't going to let humanity down. The Zenthari trials were an ancient tradition, a series of challenges designed to test the worthiness of those who sought to court the royal lineage. Though rarely invoked in modern times, Princess Zalintha had revived them, claiming they were necessary to sift out those who were truly exceptional. No one had passed in decades. Adrian Cole stood in a small chamber just outside the arena where the first trial would take place. A Zenthari steward, tall and imposing, explained the rules in clipped tones. The first trial, Adrian learned, was a test of strength, though not in the traditional sense. He would be navigating a gravity shift maze while carrying a volatile energy core. If the core was mishandled or its integrity compromised, it would result in an explosion that would obliterate not only Adrian but likely half the arena as well. As the steward left, Adrian exhaled and adjusted the straps on the harness holding the energy core to his chest. He wasn't built for feats of strength, and the core's weight was already pressing uncomfortably against his ribs. But he had one advantage: years of experience thinking on his feet in tense situations. When the gates to the arena opened, Adrian stepped into a sprawling labyrinth of shifting platforms, rotating walls, and shimmering force fields. The crowd that had gathered to watch the trial erupted into cheers and jeers, their voices echoing off the high crystalline walls. Somewhere high above, the princess observed from her throne, her expression unreadable. The moment Adrian took his first step, the gravity shifted. He stumbled as the pull of his own weight suddenly increased, and the energy core pressed against him like an anchor. The maze was designed to disorient, with sections where gravity pulled sideways, upside down, or even in spirals. Zenthari warriors, trained in high-gravity environments, would have relied on their brute strength to power through. Adrian, however, quickly realized that force alone wouldn't get him far. He studied the maze as he moved, watching the patterns in the shifting platforms and force fields. It wasn't random. The maze had a rhythm, a subtle logic to its movements. Adrian began timing his steps, using the gravitational shifts to his advantage. When a platform tilted sharply, he leaned into it, letting the pull propel him forward. When gravity flipped, he crouched and used his legs to stabilize himself, minimizing the strain on his body. The crowd's jeers turned to murmurs of surprise as Adrian navigated the maze with a combination of strategy and determination. Sweat dripped down his face and his muscles burned, but he kept moving, his mind focused on the task at hand. When he finally reached the maze's center and placed the energy core into its containment unit, a thunderous silence fell over the arena. For a moment, Adrian thought he had failed. Then, the containment unit lit up with a soft golden glow, signaling success. The crowd erupted into a mix of cheers and astonished whispers. Adrian looked up at the princess, her 3 eyes locked on him. For the first time, there was a flicker of something in her gaze, curiosity, perhaps even a hint of respect. As he stepped out of the arena, exhausted but triumphant, Adrian knew he had passed the first trial. But he also knew that the road ahead would only grow more difficult. The evening feast in the Zenthari Palace was a spectacle of color and grandeur, a tradition that showcased the Empire's opulence. Tables stretched endlessly, laden with exotic dishes that shimmered and shifted in hue, foods prepared from ingredients sourced across the galaxy. Noble conversations filled the air, a symphony of voices that spoke of alliances, conquests, and intrigues. Adrian Cole, freshly victorious from the first trial, was invited to attend as a guest of honor, a custom extended to those who managed to survive the initial challenge. He knew the invitation wasn't born of respect, it was an opportunity for the court to scrutinize him further. His human form, so plain compared to the Zenthari's shimmering elegance, drew curious and dismissive glances as he entered the grand hall. He tried to stay inconspicuous, keeping to the edges of the gathering. Despite his attempts to blend in, his every move was watched. The nobles whispered behind their crystalline goblets, their sharp eyes flicking toward him as if he were some kind of anomaly to be studied. It wasn't long before Princess Zenthari made her entrance. The hall fell silent as she appeared, her violet skin glowing under the bioluminescent lights. She moved with an effortless grace, her gown, woven from threads of liquid light, shifting colors with each step. Her presence commanded attention, and Adrian couldn't help but feel a pang of self-consciousness as her 3 eyes swept the room and landed on him. "Lieutenant Commander Adrian Cole," she said, her voice carrying easily over the crowd as she approached his corner of the hall. Adrian straightened, unsure whether to bow or stand his ground. He settled for a respectful nod. "Your Grace, you navigated the trial with unexpected competence," she said, her tone neutral. "Tell me, how did you succeed where others of greater physical strength have failed?" Adrian hesitated, sensing the weight of the question. "I didn't rely on strength," he said carefully. "The maze was a puzzle, not just an obstacle. It was meant to test patience and observation, not brute force. I adapted." Her lips curved ever so slightly, a flicker of a smile gone as quickly as it came. "Adaptation is a quality often underestimated," she said. "Your people pride themselves on it, do they not?" "We do," Adrian replied, sensing a subtle challenge in her words. "It's one of the reasons we've survived, even thrived, despite our limitations." The princess tilted her head, studying him as though he were an enigma. "You speak with conviction, yet you are aware of how fragile your kind appears to us." Adrian nodded, meeting her gaze. "We are fragile, yes. But fragility doesn't mean weakness. It means we've had to find strength in other ways. In ingenuity, in perseverance, in unity." Her three eyes narrowed, and for a moment Adrian felt as though she were peeling back the layers of his soul. Then she gave a small nod, turning to leave. Interesting. Perhaps there is more to you than appearances suggest. As she walked away, the court erupted into whispers again, but Adrian paid them no mind. His brief exchange with the princess lingered in his thoughts. For the first time, he felt as though he wasn't just being judged, but also being genuinely considered. That night, as he prepared for the next trial, Adrian couldn't shake the feeling that he had taken the first steps in earning more than just survival. He had earned the princess's curiosity, and perhaps, just perhaps, a sliver of her respect. Final trial loomed over Adrian like a dark cloud, a challenge unlike any he had faced before. The Zenthari trials were renowned for testing strength, intellect, and resilience, but this last challenge was different. It wasn't a physical contest or a test of logic. It was a trial of empathy. Adrian stood in the Great Hall of Deliberation, a space designed for diplomatic negotiations and intricate debates. Two factions of Zenthari stood at opposite ends of the chamber, their leaders bristling with tension. They were from rival clans, the Tychal and the Venser, their feud spanning generations. The origins of their conflict had long since been lost to time, but the hatred between them burned as brightly as ever. Princess Zalientha sat upon her throne, her gaze fixed on Adrian. Her expression was impassive, but he could feel the weight of her scrutiny. This trial was her design, a deliberate test to measure not just his abilities but the essence of his character. The steward explained the challenge. Adrian was to mediate the dispute between the two clans, bringing them to a resolution that both parties would accept. The task seemed impossible. The Tychal and Venser had rejected countless attempts at reconciliation, even from Zenthari diplomats of great renown. As Adrian stepped forward, the leaders of the two factions sneered, their disdain for the human evident. "What can this fragile creature possibly offer?" spat Kyrene of the Tychal, her eyes narrowing in contempt. "Another waste of time," growled Vortek of the Venser, his towering form bristling with irritation. Adrian raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to waste anyone's time," he said calmly. "I'm here to listen." The room fell silent at his words. It was such a simple statement, yet it carried a weight that seemed to catch the warring factions off guard. For the first time, someone had not approached them with ultimatums or grandiose solutions, but with a willingness to understand. Adrian began by asking questions, drawing out the grievances of each side. The Tychal spoke of ancestral lands stolen by the Venser, of sacred sites desecrated. The Venser, in turn, recounted injustices of their own, betrayals, broken treaties, and unfulfilled promises. As the stories unfolded, Adrian noticed something. Both sides were driven by a shared pain, a sense of loss and betrayal that mirrored one another. He pointed this out gently, his tone measured and non-confrontational. "It seems to me that both of your clans have suffered greatly," he said. "But have you ever considered that the true enemy might not be each other, but the cycle of hatred that keeps you bound to this conflict?" His words hung in the air, and for a moment no one spoke. Adrian continued, drawing from his own experiences as a human. He told them stories of humanity's history, of wars that had ravaged Earth and nearly destroyed his species. But he also spoke of reconciliation, of how enemies had found common ground and rebuilt together. "It wasn't easy," he admitted. "It took generations of effort and countless failures. But in the end, we learned that peace is built not by erasing the past, but by choosing to move forward together despite it." The leaders of the Tychal and Venser exchanged uneasy glances. For the first time, there was a crack in their animosity, a flicker of something that might have been understanding. Adrian seized the moment, proposing a compromise, a joint council where representatives from both clans would oversee disputed territories and work together to protect their shared interests. It was a small step, but one that planted the seeds of trust. When the clans finally agreed to the proposal, the chamber erupted in astonished murmurs. The impossible had been achieved, and it was a human who had done it. Princess Zalientha rose from her throne, her three eyes fixed on Adrian with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. The hills were calm. "You have done what even my best diplomats could not," she said, her voice carrying a rare note of admiration. "Perhaps there is wisdom in fragility after all." Adrian bowed, his heart pounding. He had passed the trial, but more importantly, he had shown that humanity's greatest strength lay not in its power, but in its capacity to connect and heal. The days following the final trial were a blur of attention and scrutiny for Adrian. The news of his success spread quickly throughout the Zenthari Empire, igniting debates and conversations in every corner of the crystalline cities. For the first time in recent memory, the Tikal and Venser clans had agreed to sit together in peace, an event so unprecedented that it seemed almost unreal to those who had lived their entire lives under the shadow of their conflict. Adrian, however, felt the weight of his victory pressing heavily on his shoulders. The trial had been about more than resolving an ancient feud. It had been a test of whether he, as a human, could rise to the impossibly high standards set by Princess Zalthaya. And while he had succeeded, he still had no idea what the princess truly thought of him. He didn't have to wait long to find out. One evening, as he stood on one of the palace's many balconies overlooking the vibrant city below, a soft voice broke the stillness. "You have surprised me, Adrian Cole." He turned to see Princess Xylitha approaching, her regal form bathed in the silver light of Zenthari's twin moons. She moved with an elegance that seemed almost otherworldly, her gown shimmering like liquid starlight. Adrian felt his throat tighten as she stopped a few steps away, her three eyes fixed intently on him. "Your Grace," he said, bowing slightly. "I wasn't expecting your company." "You expect what I offer," she replied, a hint of amusement flickering in her tone. "But you have earned my attention, and that is not something I grant lightly." Adrian straightened, his heart pounding. "I only did what I thought was right. And that is what makes you so intriguing," she said, her voice softening. "The others who have come before you sought to impress me with displays of power, wealth, or intellect. Yet you relied on none of these things. You succeeded because you embraced what others might consider weaknesses." Adrian wasn't sure how to respond. He had faced countless challenges in his life, but standing before Zaliantha, with her piercing gaze and commanding presence, made him feel more exposed than any battlefield or negotiation table ever had. "I've always believed that strength isn't just about what you can do," he said after a moment. "It's about understanding when to let others help you, when to listen, and when to take risks for the greater good." Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger but in deep thought. An unusual perspective for one so fragile. "I prefer to think of it as adaptable," Adrian said with a small smile. To his surprise, Zalintha's lips curved into a faint smile of her own. It was fleeting, but it was there, a crack in her otherwise impenetrable demeanor. For a moment, silence stretched between them, the sounds of the bustling city below a distant hum. Then she stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "You are not what I expected, Adrian Cole, but perhaps that is precisely what I needed." Adrian's breath caught in his throat. There was something in her tone, something vulnerable and genuine that he had never heard from her before. "Your Grace," he began, but she raised a hand to silence him. "Call me Zalitha," she said, her three eyes meeting his, "at least when we are alone." Adrian nodded, the weight of her words settling over him. In that moment, he realized that the trials, the challenges, and even the disdain of the Zenthari court had all been worth it, because somehow, against all odds, he had earned the respect, and perhaps something more, of the most formidable being he had ever known. Adrian stood on the grand dais of the Zenthari council chamber, the eyes of an entire empire fixed on him. The room was alive with energy, a sea of shimmering Zenthari nobles and dignitaries murmuring in anticipation. It was the culmination of everything he had endured, the trials, the judgment, and the impossible challenge of earning a place in a society that saw humans as frail, insignificant creatures. At the center of it all was Princess Lietha. She stood tall and regal beside him, her violet skin glowing softly under the bioluminescent lights. Her 3 eyes scanned the crowd with a calm authority that silenced even the most skeptical whispers. Despite her composed exterior, there was an intensity in her gaze when it turned to him, a mixture of pride, curiosity, and something deeper. Adrian's presence here was unprecedented. No human had ever stood in such a position of prominence within the Zenthari Empire. But his actions had left the court with no choice but to acknowledge him. He had passed their sacred trials, brokered peace where centuries of diplomacy had failed, and earned the princess's favor. The High Arbiter of the Zenthari, an elder with a flowing mantle that seemed to ripple like liquid crystal, stepped forward to address the assembly. "It is not often that our traditions are shaken," the Arbiter began, their voice resonating through the chamber. "And yet this human, this Adrian Cole, has done what we believed impossible. He has proven that worth is not confined to appearance, nor to species, but to the spirit within." The crowd murmured again, though this time with less derision and more curiosity. Adrian shifted slightly, uncomfortable under the weight of their attention but unwilling to let it show. He glanced at Zarianthal, who gave him the barest nod of encouragement. When the Arbiter finished their address, Zalintha stepped forward, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Adrian Cole has shown us that even in fragility there is strength. Even in difference there is value. He has challenged not only our perceptions, but my own." Adrian's heart skipped at her words. She spoke with the conviction of someone who rarely offered praise, and he could feel the weight of what she was giving him in front of her people. She turned to him, her 3 eyes meeting his. "Adrian Cole, by the authority vested in me as heir to the Zenthari throne, I name you an honored ally of our empire. You are not merely a representative of your species. You are a bridge between our worlds." The room erupted into applause, though some clapped reluctantly. Adrian felt a swell of emotions: relief, pride, and a sense of responsibility. He had achieved something extraordinary, but he knew the work was far from over. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Zalithal lingered beside him. "You've done more than I ever thought possible," she said, her voice low and private. "And yet, I sense that this is only the beginning of your journey." Adrian turned to her, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of feelings inside him. "If it means standing by your side, I'm ready for whatever comes next." She regarded him for a long moment, and then, in a gesture that stunned both him and the few remaining courtiers, she reached out and placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. It was a small gesture by human standards, but a significant one for the Zenthari, a sign of deep trust and respect. "You have earned your place, Adrian Cole," she said, her tone softer now. "But know this, our people will not make it easy for you. They will watch, judge, and doubt." "Let them," Adrian said, a confident smile forming. "I've faced worse, and besides, I have you to keep me on my toes." A rare laugh escaped her, a sound that seemed to light up the space around them. "Indeed you do, but don't think I'll go easy on you, human." "Wouldn't expect anything less," Adrian replied, his smile widening. As they left the chamber together, the weight of the Zenthari Empire's gaze still upon them, Adrian felt a sense of purpose he had never known before. He had come to this place as an unassuming substitute, a man out of his depth in a world that had no place for him. Now he walked beside a princess who had once dismissed him as her equal in more ways than one. And though the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, he knew they would face it together, as unlikely allies bound by respect, curiosity, and something that might one day become even more profound.